When the groom collapsed at the five-star country club wedding, the room descended into pure chaos. I instinctively rushed forward, dropping my dish towel to check his airway. But before my fingers could touch his pulse, the bride's wealthy father shoved me backward onto the marble floor. "Get your filthy hands off my son-in-law! You're just a dishwasher!" He spat, his voice echoing off the high ceilings as the crowd snickered. I looked up from the cold floor, holding my tongue, knowing any scene would get me fired from the only minimum wage job keeping a roof over my head. But as the man reached to push me again, a towering four-star military veteran stepped out of the crowd. He froze, looking directly at my worn apron, and his face drained of all color. "Stand down," the general commanded, his voice trembling. "That dishwasher saved my life in Baghdad. She's Major Miller, the top combat trauma surgeon this country ever had. My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 38 years old, and if you saw me covered in grease traps and soapy bathwater in the kitchen of the Grand Pines Country Club, you'd never guess who I used to be. You'd just see a dishwasher, a quiet, invisible ghost taking home minimum wage to keep a roof over her head. 6 years ago, I didn't wear a stained apron. I wore the uniform of a decorated major and combat trauma surgeon in the United States Army. I've operated under mortar fire in Baghdad. I've held bleeding arteries together with my bare hands in the back of flying Black Hawks. But war couldn't destroy me. Corporate greed did. When I returned to civilian medicine, I blew the whistle on a powerful hospital board member who was falsifying patient records for profit. Instead of bringing him down, he used his millions to frame me for severe medical negligence. In less than a month, my license was stripped, my reputation was shattered, and my name was dragged through the dirt. With no legal team and no money left to fight back, I took the only work I could find, scrubbing the plates of the city's wealthy elite while their arrogant head chef barked orders at me. Every single day I swallowed my pride, hid my past, and kept my head down. Until the night of the city's biggest wedding, when fate brought my past and present crashing together in the middle of the ballroom. The Grand Pines ballroom was blindingly white that evening, decorated with thousands of imported orchids for the wedding of the year. Julian Vance, the son of the city's most ruthless real estate developer, was marrying into political royalty. From the kitchen prep station, I could see the high society guests sipping $200 champagne. I pushed through the swinging doors, carrying a heavy tray of polished glassware, doing my best to remain completely invisible. Then, the music stopped. A sharp gasp echoed across the room. Julian suddenly clutched his throat, his face turning a terrifying shade of blue. He staggered backward, knocking over a tower of champagne flutes before crashing hard onto the marble floor. He was choking, his airway completely compromised from an acute allergic reaction. Instinct overrode my survival rules. 6 years of dishwashing vanished, and the combat surgeon took over. I dropped my tray, pulled a ballpoint pen from my apron, and sprinted toward the dying young man. I dropped to my knees beside Julian, fingers flying over his neck to locate the cricoid membrane. I needed to perform an emergency cricothyroidotomy before his brain was starved of oxygen. "Step back, he needs air," I commanded, my voice carrying the crisp authority of an officer. "Get your filthy hands off my son." A heavy hand grabbed my shoulder and violently threw me backward. I skidded across the slick floor, scraping my palms against shattered glass. It was Julian's father, Arthur Vance. His face was twisted in disgust as he stood over me, looking down like I was trash he'd stepped on. "You're just a dishwasher," he spat, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as guests whispered in horror. "Don't you dare touch him with your dirty hands." Arthur Vance loomed over me, his hand raised as if to push me even further back into the broken glass. The crowd murmured in approval, watching the greasy dishwasher get put in her place, while Julian gasped for air on the floor, his skin darkening by the second. "Someone call real doctors," Arthur bellowed. "Get this staff trash out of my sight." Before Arthur's hand could make contact with me again, an iron grip caught his wrist mid-air. "Stand down, Arthur," a thunderous voice growled. The room went instantly dead silent. The man who had stepped out of the VIP inner circle was built like an armored tank, wearing a sharp tux decorated with a 4-star ribbon pin. It was General Richard Vance, Arthur's older brother, a retired 4-star war hero and one of the most respected military figures in the country. Arthur blinked in shock. "Richard? What are you doing? She's just the help." "I said stand down," the general roared, shoving Arthur back with effortless command. General Vance turned toward me on the floor. As his eyes fell on my face, the rigid posture of a commander melted into sheer disbelief. His face drained of all color. His jaw dropped, and his eyes widened in utter shock. The entire room held its breath. "Oh my God," the general whispered, his voice trembling in a way no one in that room had ever heard before. "It's her." He stepped past his furious brother and dropped to one knee right beside me in the shattered glass. Without hesitating, the 4-star general extended a hand of deep respect to help me up. "Major Miller," General Vance said, his command voice ringing out so every wealthy guest in the ballroom heard every single word. "You saved my entire battalion in the Fallujah Valley. Command this room, Doctor." The entire ballroom froze as General Vance's words echoed off the marble walls. Arthur's mouth hung open, his face pale with embarrassment, but there was no time for his pride. Julian was seconds away from brain death. I didn't waste a heartbeat. I snatched the ballpoint pen from my apron, snapped off the casing to leave the hollow tube, and uncapped a clean silver butter knife from the head table. "Hold his shoulders steady," I barked at the general. Without hesitation, the 4-star war hero dropped to his knees in his tailored tuxedo, pinning the young man's shoulders to the floor. The crowd watched in terrified silence as my hands, hardened by years of harsh dish soap, moved with absolute surgical precision. With one swift, practiced movement, I made a small incision over the cricoid membrane and inserted the hollow pen tube into his airway. A sharp, ragged rush of air whistled through the tube. Julian's chest suddenly heaved upward. The deep purple flush in his face instantly began to fade back to a healthy pink as oxygen surged into his lungs. Within minutes, the heavy oak doors burst open and a team of paramedics rushed in with a gurney. The lead paramedic dropped to check Julian's vitals, then looked up at me in utter disbelief. "Who performed this cricothyroidotomy?" he asked, his voice shaking. "It's flawless. 5 more seconds without this tube, and he would have been gone." General Vance stood tall beside me, resting a firm, proud hand on my shoulder. "Major Sarah Miller did." Arthur swallowed hard, realizing the massive scene he had caused. Desperate to cover his tracks, he pulled out a thick leather wallet, slapped a stack of $100 bills onto a tray, and sneered. "Fine. Take the money for your trouble. Just don't make a scene about how we treated you." I looked down at the stack of cash Arthur had tossed onto the tray, then looked him dead in the eye. I didn't touch a single bill. "Keep your money, Mr. Vance," I said calmly. "My integrity isn't for sale." General Vance stepped between us, his face dark with fury as he glared at his brother. "Is this how you treat a war hero, Arthur? A woman who risked her life for this country?" He turned to me, his voice softening with genuine concern. "Major Miller, how in God's name did the top combat surgeon in my division end up scrubbing dishes in a place like this?" The room went completely still as guests leaned in, desperate to hear the answer. "6 years ago, I was framed," I replied, my voice echoing clearly across the ballroom. "I uncovered a massive insurance fraud scheme at St. Jude Medical Center. Before I could file a report, the board member running the operation fabricated negligence charges against me, revoked my surgical license, and blackmailed every legal firm in the state so I couldn't fight back." Arthur's face twitched. "That's ridiculous. Board members don't—" "Shut up, Arthur!" General Vance barked, before looking back at me. "Who was the board member, Sarah? Give me a name." I pointed a firm finger across the room, past the stunned crowd directly at the bride's father, Dr. Charles Montgomery, who is currently trying to slip out through the side doors. Dr. Charles Montgomery, I said coldly. The man who destroyed my career to save his own skin. General Vance's eyes narrowed into slits. He pulled out his encrypted military phone and made a single call. This is General Vance. Get me Federal Prosecutor Adams on the line immediately. We have an active fraud and corruption case right here in Sacramento. The ballroom turned into an arena of public reckoning. Dr. Charles Montgomery froze near the exit, his hand lingering on the brass door handle as two uniformed military police officers, stationed outside for General Vance's detail, stepped inside and blocked his path. "General, this is absurd," Montgomery stammered, his face pale and sweating profusely under the chandelier lights. "She's a disgraced former doctor trying to slander my reputation." "Is that so?" General Vance said, his heels clicking against the marble as he walked toward him. "Because federal investigators have spent the last 3 years dismantling the very offshore accounts you used to hide your hospital fraud. We had the evidence, Montgomery. We just needed the victim's name to tie the bow on your arrest warrant." Gasps erupted across the room. Guests whipped out their phones, recording every second of Montgomery's fall from grace. The general turned to his brother, Arthur, whose arrogant posture had completely collapsed into sheer panic. "And as for you, Arthur, your company's federal contracts are under immediate review. If this is how you treat a decorated combat veteran who just saved your son's life, you don't deserve a single dime of government business." Within 20 minutes, federal agents entered the ballroom. Montgomery was placed in handcuffs right in front of his daughter, his high society peers, and the national media reporters attending the wedding. The local news crews, who had been waiting outside for the post-wedding reception, swarmed the entrance, capturing the disgraced board member being led away in shame. Before leaving, the lead federal prosecutor walked straight over to me in my grease-stained dishwashing apron. He handed me an official document with a gold federal seal. "Major Miller," he said, speaking loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Your medical license has been fully restored by emergency order of the State Board. Furthermore, the Department of Defense is clearing your record of all false allegations with full back pay and honors." I looked over at Arthur and Montgomery. The men who had called me just a dishwasher were now facing decades in federal prison, while I stood tall in the center of the room. I took off my grease-stained apron for the very last time, laying it neatly on the kitchen prep table. I walked out of the Grand Pines Country Club with my head held high, leaving behind the dark years of obscurity and doubt. 3 months later, I accepted an appointment as chief of trauma surgery at a leading veterans hospital, a place where I could use my hands to heal those who sacrificed everything for our country. Life has a funny way of testing your character. People will judge you by the title you hold, the clothes you wear, or the job you're forced to do to survive. But a title doesn't define who you are. Your integrity, your skills, and your spirit do. They called me just a dishwasher. But in the end, truth and duty spoke louder than their arrogance. Now, I'm curious about you listening to my story today. Have you ever been looked down upon or undervalued by someone who didn't know your true worth? Comment below with the city you're watching from and tell me your thoughts. Thank you for watching until the very end, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories.